Hello, my name is Will Stroll. I'm one of the sales engineers at .NET New Corporation. In this video I'm going to be talking to you about how you can feel like an expert to help you feel more confident during your speaking engagements. As a speaker, this is one of the areas that can really trip us up. It's the goal of this video to help you have a few more tips to feel more confident, be more confident, and be generally better prepared before your next presentation. So speaking in front of a group of people of any size can really feel intimidating, especially if you're new to speaking. Probably the biggest and most common reason for this is because people are looking at you as being a subject matter expert for the topic you're speaking about. This isn't completely true though, even though it's probably your first or number one fear. You don't have to be the expert, and people don't expect anyone to know all of the answers off the top of their heads. So if any person were to know all of the answers, they'd look a lot more like this guy. By the way, he didn't know all the answers either. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given when I first began presenting was the definition of an expert. We often think of an expert as being somebody who just knows the answer. You can just ask them and they just respond. The definition that I have found to be more true is this. An expert is not a person that knows everything. An expert is someone that knows how to find the right answer. An expert has, and they know the resources to find the right answer. Since we cannot be the intimidating version of what an expert is projected to be, we can at least be more confident in front of our audience by feeling like one. I'm going to talk about 6 simple steps to do this. Now when it comes to the fears about presenting in front of an audience, it really comes down to the same fundamentals that are behind most fears. The unknown. Simply not knowing the answers to specific questions. These steps should help guide you to knowing the right answers, leading you to be a more confident and knowledgeable presenter, and basically feeling like an expert. These steps should really apply to everyone, regardless to whether you're presenting to your peers, customers, or even at a conference. Believe it or not, the basics have absolutely nothing to do with your subject matter. It has everything to do with your audience and where you'll be speaking. This should be information that is fed to you by whomever invited you to speak, but you can ask for it as well. It doesn't matter if you're presenting at a conference or selling something. This is really some very appropriate information that you can ask for. These basics are the last thing that you should need to worry about. So get this out of the way so it really doesn't distract you. The first basic to talk about is your audience. No speaker should begin planning their presentation before knowing some very key details about the audience they will be standing in front of. Now this isn't a very comprehensive list, but it should help you get started. First, who is sitting in your audience? How many people will there be? Are there any key individuals that you need to know more about than the others? If this is for any kind of sales, is there someone that you need to impress more than the others? Do you need to tailor anything specific to any of the people that you single out? The interests of your audience is incredibly important. Are they technical minded or design minded? Are they web savvy? Are they a standard business person or a stay-at-home mom or a mix somewhere in between? You can use this information to plan to relate to them through some pop culture events or local news or sports. Do you think the core of your audience has a good sense of humor? Believe me, depending on the type of presentation you're planning, you can indeed run into a very dry audience. Skill levels are more important in some types of presentations than the others. If you have technical content planned for a non-technical audience, you should have your presentation completely tailored for them. Speak at a higher level. Don't show code or configuration views. Change the terminology you use. Describe steps in greater detail. Maybe even rip out some content altogether. If the opposite is true, your planning should be adjusted for the same reasons. So background is such an important piece of knowing your audience. Where do they come from? Are they part of a specific industry, or can they relate to your standard phrases and examples? For example, if you have an audience from Spain, it probably wouldn't make any sense to use phrases and examples from American football. If they get the phrase at all, they know immediately that you didn't pay attention to who they are or their needs. If they don't get the phrase, then you have failed from connecting to them completely. While this example crosses international borders, though, some examples can be made within your very own region. Environmental elements should definitely be taken into account as well. Are you presenting first thing in the morning or in the afternoon? People's attention spans can be very different in either of these time slots, especially right after lunch. Is anyone presenting before or after you? Do you need to beef up the beginning or end of your presentation? Are you speaking at a convention? Do you need to account for environmental variables at the convention? Is there wireless connectivity? Are you competing with Twitter? Really, the bottom line is your audience is distracted or influenced by anything environmental at the venue or event, and this is something that you definitely need to plan for. The other basic that you need to know is the venue. This is a must. Like the audience, you definitely need to become completely familiar with the venue before you arrive. This is something that you don't necessarily need to know, though, before you start doing your presentation itself. So first and foremost, do you know where it is? Do you know how to get there? Do you need lodging nearby? The last thing in the world that should happen when you arrive is to get there late or rush to the event. Either situation would really reflect poorly upon you, and it will definitely affect your presentation. So next, do you need an internet connection? If there is internet, are you allowed to connect to it? Will there be enough bandwidth for what you need to do? Will there be any firewall or security issues? Sometimes you can't connect to certain things. As a speaker, we are initially more or less comfortable with specific types of rooms as well. Some of us like a desk to sit behind. Some like to have a lectern. Others prefer to have neither. Will you be on a stage? Do you have room to walk around, or do you want to? The reality is that there's a right environment for a speaker, regardless to preference, and that environment depends on the type of presentation you're giving and the audience that you'll be speaking to. But not all venues will give you a choice. You will need to inquire and plan for whatever environment you'll be speaking in. Other questions for a presenter might include asking if there's a practice room or if there's a place to put your things down during the presentation. So speakers also need to be aware of how the audience will be presented to them. Will they be sitting in chairs? Is it a lab environment? Is it a conference room? Is the seating comfortable? Is the room the right size for the expected number of attendees? As a presenter, these are all things that you can account for. So the final area here is ambience. There's a lot of things about your presentation room that you should need to know. Some of them have already been mentioned. However, there are still things you should potentially know to be as prepared as you can be. For example, is the heating or air conditioning controlled? So this has a lot more to do with the actual presentation than anything else. You want to build a natural flow in your presentation. You need this flow in order to help tell a story, or even if your presentation is highly technical. A story can be told. You can use your flow to invoke emotions in your audience and resonate with the reasons that they are listening to you in the first place. That's incredibly important. If you don't have a story of any kind, then your presentation really has little hope of being effective at all. So building a story is much easier than you might think. Your presentation is already being planned about solving a problem. And that problem might be physical, conceptual, abstract, but there is a problem to be solved. Your story should follow along the lines of stating the problem, recognizing the potential benefits for solving the problem, and then presenting a solution. The best presentations, of course, would take this a step further. This could be in the form of creating fictional companies, people, or even using people in the audience. You should never underestimate the power of including audience members into your presentation. If it's done right, it's always a good idea. So it's important that your story works up to something. The most obvious thing would, of course, be that the problem is solved and the solution to the problem is very exciting. But you always want to leave on a high note. I find it the most beneficial to begin with the most complicated or boring things first. This is because you already have the audience invested in hearing you early on. As your talk goes on, the last thing you want them to walk away from you with is the visual and emotion feeling of the complicated parts of your presentation. The less features or visual stimuli you have at the end of your presentation, the better. This is what your audience will remember for most of your presentation. Make sure when you end, the easier and most fun views or ideas are presented in the simplest way. Enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. There's really no way around it. You can see examples of it everywhere. You can look at any Steve Jobs presentation, for example. When you end your presentation, you should be just as visibly and audibly excited about your solution and ending as it is itself, or maybe even more. The last thing someone will be excited about is something that comes over either monotone or otherwise boring. Finally, make sure you end early. The best presentations and presenters in the world will end early. Give your audience the gift of more time. I really don't know about you, but I always appreciate more time. Your audience will too. So, Gar Reynolds is considered a thought leader and a publisher or published author on the topic of presentations. He has an analogy of identifying presentations with a bento box. If you're not familiar with a bento box, it's not very much like in a traditional American meal. It's built to give you just enough food and not too much to be full, and it's also very beautifully presented. But the idea is to have you feel great after eating and not feel stuffed and lethargic. So leaving early, along with these other high notes, should do just that for your audience. In sports, there's a saying: a good offense is a good defense, meaning it's much easier to prevent the other team from scoring than to score yourself. Think about examples like boxing. It's not the person that lands the most punches that wins; it's the person that gets hit less. This is true of presentations as well. Try to structure your presentation in a way that answers questions before they're asked. You should anticipate that the questions will be asked and what they are. So if you speak to a salesperson, their job is all about removing obstacles. We all have obstacles in our life, and our presentations are not immune to this idea. Your presentations should be structured in a way that obstacles are removed before they actually become an obstacle. So this is something that is really 100% within your control. The whole idea here is to anticipate questions that will be asked by your audience and present your topic in such a way that these questions are answered before they become a question. Review the presentation and try to find the holes in your words, your demonstrations, and your story. If any fear about presenting is true, it's this: something will go wrong. It just will. Stuff happens. How we are prepared to handle it and how we execute our preparation is what makes all of the difference. Honestly, I've had presentations that I felt were completely wrong, and if I could assign a percentage to it, about 80% of it went wrong. But to my surprise, I was still given a lot of compliments on those presentations. The moments that I did mention that something went wrong, I was told every single time that the person didn't notice. That was a huge revelation for me. So, having a backup plan is all about anticipating the things that could go wrong with your presentation and plan to be able to adapt if any of those things actually do go wrong. What if there isn't internet access or it goes down? Or what if your demo website isn't available? What if your laptop crashes? What if you can't connect to the projector? I've seen all of these things happen, and sometimes at a very public and very large venue. If you plan ahead of time for these things, you will end up looking like a hero instead of the opposite. You can calmly employ your backup plan, and sometimes your audience will have no idea. So believe me, there are many ways, there are many times that the audience has no idea that something went wrong if you're able to react to these problems in a way that doesn't portray panic. That's really key. The cool and collected presenter will always convey to the audience that you know what you're doing. If there's any step that I really don't follow, it's this one, and I'm completely wrong for that, and I'll be the first to admit it. I would never in 100 years suggest that anyone should walk into any presentation without having rehearsed it at least a few times. You can find out many things during your rehearsal that you could never anticipate, no matter how much planning you put in your presentation and no matter how many times you recite it in your head or look at it on the screen. So, like a symphony wouldn't dare perform in front of an audience without some rehearsing, your presentation likely has many moving parts, and you should rehearse too. If you ask any seasoned presenter for advice, they will likely tell you to remember the 3 R's: rehearse, rehearse, and rehearse. It's not enough to look over your presentation and go over it in your head. No matter how thorough you are, you will miss something. You should go into a quiet room or a similar venue and perform the presentation as if your audience was actually in front of you, from beginning to end and no stopping. If you want to really be prepared, record your presentation on video and play it back to yourself. Check to be sure you're emphasizing the right things at the right time. Look out for the ums and ahs, and pay attention to see if you're looking or sounding nervous, and be sure that you're answering questions before they become questions. Above all, you'll have the great convenience of fixing issues before you're standing in front of an audience. That's invaluable. Hopefully by now you have realized that you're not the expert. I'm not the expert. The guy next to you isn't. Nearly any speaker you've sat in front of is not the expert. But every successful presenter has one thing in common. They played the role of an expert. And this is really easier than you think. We've all seen small dogs and how they act. No matter if we love them or hate them, most of them act as much larger than they really are. The biggest dog in the world and can intrude on their territory, and they put on such an act that the larger dog backs down. If you've ever witnessed this, it can be an amazing thing to watch and hilarious. I'm not suggesting that you bark like a dog at your audience, but you should appear to be the bigger dog to your audience when it's your turn to speak. So remember, this is your moment to shine in front of the crowd. You will need to look right, act right, and sound right. This ranges from your body language to what you're wearing. Be sure that you wear the right clothes for the audience and the venue. And make sure you stand tall and confident, even and especially if it's against your norm. Enunciate with a loud tone, but don't sound like you're yelling. Act like you know what you're doing and know what you're talking about. You'll be surprised at how well this can convey a message to your audience, no matter who they are. But just be careful. There's a fine line between looking like an expert and looking like a manufactured expert. You should look believable, but not arrogant. And by the way, there will be times where no matter how much preparation and research you put into your presentation, you will be asked a question that you simply do not know the answer to. And this is okay. There's nothing wrong with telling a member of the audience that you'll find the answer for them. Just make sure that you do follow up the way you say you will. So you've now had an introduction to 6 easy steps that you can take to feel like an expert. First, know the basics. Get the easy information out of the way. Number 2, plan and stick to a natural flow. 3, answer the questions before a question exists. 4, have a backup plan for everything you have control over. 5, rehearse your presentation. I can't say this enough. And finally, 6, play the role. Make sure that if nothing else, you portray yourself as an expert, but in a good way. So thank you for watching this video, and be sure to look for more in this series of presentation videos.